Great. Hi, I'm Rebecca Petzel, and this is Mary Tobin. And we are going to have a conversation about the work that we were privileged to do together this past summer and fall with the State Infrastructure Funders Table in the field of civic engagement. So just wanted to start off with Mary talking to us about why we were working together in the first place and kind of a general what the work was.
Sure. So I work with a group of funders who do state-based civic engagement infrastructure funding. And we really had a shared sense of frustration about the lack of resources that were available for the state-based work that we were supporting and the inability to feel like that was going to be sustainable over time. And in addition to that, we felt like there was a lot of miscommunication and some tension between national funders who fund in states and state-based funders. And while we had good relationships, we felt like there was this fundamental asymmetry of information and just sort of lack of communication and awareness about where we were all coming from. And we felt like we needed to have an approach where we were bringing people together. And so originally we thought, well, if we could just organize our friends to do what we want them to do, that would really solve all of our problems. And when we thought about it a little bit more, we realized that we needed to figure out what a collective approach could look like. How could we be more aligned in our giving and our thinking and strategy? And that's when we started to think about what we didn't know in terms of how to do that, and we started working with Rebecca and Group Haya to think about how we could do that in a more collective way.
And I think it's important to understand who you guys are as funders of state infrastructure. So there was a bias in our group for funders who focused on the states and focused on more local nexus of community as opposed to focusing on national policy in DC. But it didn't mean that you were all state-based funders. You had a philosophy about the states and state infrastructure and the way the work gets done. And the reason I'd like you to speak of that is the core question that we had at the heart of our work is, what if we as funders do what we increasingly demand of our grantees, which is share information and align their work in service of shared goals? And so the fact that this project came about is because of who you are as funders, that you're demanding that of your grantees. So can you speak a little bit more about what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because we work in the civic engagement landscape, that naturally has election cycles, right? So every year there's elections. We try to encourage underrepresented communities to come out and vote, to register, and turn out on election day, in addition to passing local policies that are more progressive for their communities in the local regions and the states. And in order to do that, we really saw that as existing in a network of organizations who need to work together to get to victory. There's no one organization that could possibly do that, and likewise no one foundation that could possibly cover all of the variety of needs that go into making success on election day, before election day, and after, in terms of all the work that needs to be done in the field of civic engagement. And so we had experimented with funding a lot of new networks and collaborations, and yet we had not really created any new networks and collaborations among ourselves as funders. And we had a strong value and sense of practicing what we preach in that respect.
Yeah, and I think that was kind of the key. In terms of what we did, I think that was the heart of the question we were answering, and I think practicing what we preach was kind of the core value that was embedded into the process, frankly, because of Mary, because that's a value of your foundations.
Yes, and I would say of the design team that eventually helped move this project along, there was a group of us who, in our own foundations, I think were all committed to this kind of learning and experimentation and wanted to make sure that we made that happen in the project. And I was just curious what your perspective was when you came in and joined this group. How did you see the work and the way we were thinking about it?
Yeah, it's funny. One of the things that we did is you guys saw this need. You saw a frustration with the fact that funders weren't collaborating at the same level as the grantees were, and because you were fundamentally part of the system, it was creating issues. And so you were hungry to do something about it, but we weren't sure what. And so we came to a convening with all those funders, and we did a workshop around collective intelligence and what does a high-performing network look like. And that was actually where we presented a lot of thinking that we borrowed from Eugene Eric Kim, who's involved, around what is collective intelligence and what is the nature of the problems that we're tackling as civic engagement funders. And it's inherently complex. We use the framework of wicked challenges, and we talked about what some traditional problem-solving techniques look like and what do problem-solving techniques look like that respect the complexity of the challenge that we're dealing with while trying to leave space for collective intelligence to emerge. And so we presented that, and then we also did a workshop where we asked this group to collectively vision. And what was remarkable is when we came back to that 6 months later and we revisited this vision that was done with 80 funders in a room through like very ad hoc, quick little workshop, it was the vision. Like, we got there. And so I think that experience of the group saying, we can think strategically together. We do agree there is a problem of the way we are not working together. So yeah, let's experiment. And so go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say the visioning exercise was really powerful. We work in a field where we're always focusing on the problem and what the solutions are to the problem, but we're not often in this space where we're given the opportunity to think about what our collective vision is, what is the goal that we're trying to move towards in terms of the solution. We often frankly put that on the grantees. That's their realm. They're in the field practicing that. And so I don't think we have taken it upon ourselves as funders to think about, well, what are we investing towards? And I think it was really wonderful to get that sense of unity around that and made it easier for us to then do the hard work that came next in the experiment.
And when we wanted to talk about kind of what worked well, I think one of the things that worked well, that kickoff kind of exemplified what I think we did well, which was we provided a theoretical groundwork for doing something differently, because that theoretical groundwork was very important to this community of people at the exact same time as we practiced working differently. So we paired those two things all along the way, and so by giving people practice, but through real work, we didn't create some hypothetical. It was really about the work that they're doing. We were able to get buy-in to do a larger experiment where the whole goal of the experiment was to try and create a space for a diverse group of funders to share information and collectively strategize around what the field needs. We made it 3 months long. We worked with a small leadership design team to kind of create that space, and we had buy-in to making it emergent, because that was part of the theoretical framework that we had presented, and everyone said, yeah, we never worked like that. So compared to the other strategic spaces in the field, it was very fluid. The design team was meeting all along the way to figure out what are the questions that we need to tackle, how do we need to respond to things as a group, but we were able to get people to agree to do an emergent 3-month collective strategizing experiment with us.
During the busiest time of the year, which is still crazy to me thinking back that we enrolled 22 funders. So we had an open invitation and 22 people said yes, and that they were willing to commit to getting on the phone every other week during September, October, end of August. I mean, this is prime time, in Funderland, and I think that really spoke to the energy and the interest in what we were doing, and it was just something that was different and needed, and there was a lot of excitement. I think another thing that worked really well was, and a lot of other participants talked about this, was the technology that we used. So having Adobe Connect was an opportunity to not just feel like you were on a webinar or on a phone call where people can check out, but we were able to see each other's faces and do chat boxes and do breakout rooms and still see each other's faces in breakout and see real-time sharing of documents being edited. And I think that really gave people a sense of feeling more connected. We're all over the country and only get to see each other at conferences, really, and other important meetings. And so that was really, having that space carved out really was, I think, worked really well.
And this is something we talked about. We talked about where strategic thinking is happening currently in the system and where we wished it was happening. And one of the constraints is it tends to be happening in small groups, informally, and always face-to-face. And that was causing a dynamic where the people who are most connected to the issues in the field aren't part of the decisions that are being made. So it's one of the reasons we decided to be intentional about making this space for strategic thinking something that anyone could do from wherever they are, as opposed to thinking that we needed to fly together to kick off this process. And I think more specifically what we did well, besides just deciding to leverage technology that could enable a different type of conversation, is we treated those spaces with as much intentionality and thought and effort as we would a face-to-face space. So for the kickoff call, we did 3 practice runs leading up to that.
That was a lot of work.
It was a tremendous amount of work, but we treated it just like we were planning a strategic planning retreat that everyone was flying into. And I think more than the technology, it was that intentionality that we learned from Mary, really, is just treating this like you would any other space.
Yeah, I was fortunate to participate in a course called The Art of Online Hosting, and it really was that message of how do you treat this as a virtual meeting space and hold a lot of the same principles and practices that you would. And that was from a colleague called Adriano Pianisi from Participation Consulting. I just want to make sure he gets recognized for that work because it's been really great and helpful. And I think another thing that worked really well was honestly having Rebecca and having someone who is trained in this, is thinking about this, whose job it is to create and hold this space for us, and doing so in a way that really was still an emergent design, so that we felt almost equal in terms of participants and how we created what needed to be created, but Rebecca was always there to really guide us, create the space, put the finishing touches on everything, and really sort of put our thinking into actuality.
And I think an important piece of that also is that the experiment was time bound, so it was 3 months. So when things got hard, as they always do, we had our, this is really exciting when we started because it was new and we were building these relationships in a different way, and in the middle, universally everyone felt lost because we were sitting with that tension of not having a clear direction, and nobody was stepping in and saying, gosh darn it, this is what we're doing. Everyone was committed to letting that emerge, and the way I think we got everyone to push through that hump, we literally had a call, we called the hump call, was that it was a time-bound experiment. And we knew at the end of 3 months we'd get to come together and say, it worked, it didn't work, and that's, I think, what got the commitment to pushing through. So I know we've been actually talking for a while, so I want you to close with some thoughts about, or a thought about what it was that you learned through this experience and what it leads you to thinking about what's next.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I just have to say it was really rewarding. It felt like the culmination of a lot of years of work and relationships that had been built, but we had never had an opportunity to really be together in this way that felt like we were getting stuff done while also wrestling with tough issues. I think that was what I learned, is that you can have that balance. I think as funders we're always afraid that we don't want to be too navel gazing and let's collectively talk about stuff and la la la, but we're here to get work done, move money out to the field, have impact. And I think we were able to be successful in doing both, and I think that's our what's next challenge as well, is as we continue the phase 2 of this process, we want to think about how do we more intentionally do this in an ongoing way. So we're going to, rather than a 2-month experiment, we're going to try to do a year-long experiment where we talk monthly and we work together on a collective experiment with a start and an end date, and co-fund something that's going to have impact in the field and really involve the field in new ways. So I learned a lot as well about just what collective impact means, collective thinking. I thought I knew what that was, but I realized it's a lot harder than I actually imagined, just because it's not what I have been used to doing, and yet in some ways it feels very intuitive. And so it's this interesting dynamic of you feel like you're learning a new new instrument or using new muscles. And so I think this was a great way to start to set the table for funders about how we can be together to really do great things in this next phase.
And I think the thing that I learned, but it's something you kind of know but you learn in a different way, was the importance of practicing and really modeling our values all the way through. So you guys were doing that by convening this process, by saying, we're forcing our grantees to do this, but we don't do it. And then by going through the process of doing it, you learned, I heard from you guys that you learned a lot about what it is you're actually asking of your grantees. And it'll change the way you do the work as a result. And that was true for me as a consultant as well, is that I felt like the most valuable thing I did for you guys, besides creating and holding that space, I do agree about holding the space, was modeling. And so it was important for me to fail in front of you guys and to be okay failing in front of you guys and having that be a learning opportunity. We had calls where everything went wrong, but we laughed about it together and we learned about it together. And I think if I could send a message to the field of consultants out there, is to be more vulnerable with your clients, because you're trying to model and learn through that experience along with them. And it's an important form of leadership that I think is sometimes lost in the relationship. So, and in terms of what's next, we have to actually try and do something when the stakes are higher. This was a safe way to start. That was a big thing to learn. Practice, start with something safe. And now that we've practiced, we have to move to higher stakes terrain, and we'll see how we do.
Yes.